In the 1950s, this land was still under colonial rule until the successful Dien Bien Phu campaign brought an end to the three-colored flag of blue, white, and red. Don Ha Commune then was a region where over 90% of its area was covered by dense primeval forests or vast wild fields of reeds taller than a person's head. The profound, silent gloom of the mountains, the wild and mystical allure, full of ancient mysteries of a land with poisonous waters, didn't just stem from the landscape. It also came from an ancient legend, from the first people who arrived here to clear this land. That oral legend tells of a primeval era, centuries ago, when the first pioneers set foot on this land to clear it. They found a primitive, desolate landscape surrounded only by limestone mountains exposed to the scorching sun. Trees were sparse and withered. Beyond the vast reed fields that rose above a person's head, the entire region was suffering and desolate. Life flickered, frail and weary, under a yellow, deadly sun. But one day, from a mountain cave, a divine sacred being appeared. Pitying the people of this land, he reached out with compassion, transforming into a colossal dragon, its body hundreds of miles long, coiling, and then plunging into the valley. Rain poured for many days, driving away the burning heat, and suddenly life seemed to infuse the land. Plants flourished, wild animals began to appear, and human life, from then on, became prosperous. The truth of that legend is unknown, but the prosperous life people spoke of seemed to exist only in the tales. For this semi-mountainous region had long been a place where fish fought for sustenance. In ancient times it was a place of poisonous water and sacred forests, easy to defend, difficult to attack, with only a single narrow path running through the gorge into the commune. Therefore, it became a strategic location that every lord coveted. Feudal lords and local chieftains were replaced by bandit gangs, each vying for supremacy. After these fragmented powers came the legionnaires. The French arrived, building plantation schools, churches, establishing colonial rule, and turning this into a strategic stronghold to dominate the entire desolate semi-mountainous region through taxes and opium dens. Opium dens never appeared or existed alone. Accompanying opium dens were always gambling, social ills, and weapons. That chaotic past, filled with terrible vices, became a trump card for the colonialists, and naturally, a deep concern for the nascent revolutionary government. But the distant past, whatever it was, had receded deep into oblivion, especially after years of triumphant fire and relentless bomb. And now it returned to its inherent tranquility, silent like the towering mountain peaks surrounding it. Yet, this silence seemed to always hold mysterious things, just like the legend of the great sacred being who once sowed life upon this land. Silence also enveloped the People's Committee headquarters, where Juan, the secretary of Don Ha Commune, worked. Juan bent low, his eyes, dulled by time, scanning the ledger of registered residents. Almost all were familiar names. This area was mostly surrounded by limestone mountains and sparse forests. People lived clustered together in the valley, making them easy to recognize. Juan shook his head. Unconsciously, the long scar running across the corner of his eye, carving a deep furrow through his eyebrow, twitched causing him to scowl and quickly look away. The square jawline on his gaunt face accentuated his high cheekbones and prominent nose, giving Secretary Juan a harsh and ascetic appearance. Juan closed the ledger and put it in a drawer before dragging his wooden leg across the floor to go outside and smoke his pipe. Tonha was a very small area, originally home to fewer than 200 households. People who clung to the hills and mountainsides, raising livestock and growing corn and sweet potato. Life here was still difficult. The land's cultivation capacity limited. So most residents belonged to poor households. Living conditions and education were all substandard. The poverty of the locality was particularly etched onto the old plastered walls of the committee office. The benches were crudely made by amateur hands. The student notebooks were bound with discolored old paper. There was a statue of Chairman Ho, gifted by the district, and even the worn soldier's jacket on the commune secretary himself. Secretary Huang sat beneath the eaves of the committee office, rolling a pinch of pipe tobacco, then nodded a greeting to an elderly woman briskly walking past. Juan was about to stuff the tobacco into his pipe when he paused, noticing the woman suddenly looking at him through the committee gate, seemingly hesitant to leave. Juan blinked his good eye, looked toward the gate, then set his pipe down against an empty pillar of the eaves, and politely stood up to greet her. Elder Exoan, where are you going? Elder Exoan, a farmer nearing 70 but still quite agile, bowed low and replied, "Oh, no, sir. Just greeting you, Secretary." "Oh, please, Elder. Don't call me that. I'll be upset." "Yes, sir." Now, Elder. You keep saying, sir. But why are you out in the midday sun like this?" Elder Exone then looked up, breathing out with difficulty. "I'm herding the buffalo home, Secretary." Juan frowned, taking her arm and pulling her into a shaded spot behind the People's Committee gate. Then asked, "Where are your sons, leaving you to herd buffalo like this?" "It's too hot. You're old, you should be resting at home." Elder Ixoan seized the opportunity, sighing like a groan, then shook her head, explaining, "Oh heavens, they don't care about household chores anymore. They're off listening to sermons again. They say if they listen enough, they'll reach the great ravine and be protected by the great sacred being." The scar at the corner of Secretary Juan's eye twitched again, startling Elder Exone, who involuntarily stopped speaking, as if afraid of the authority of an official. Secretary Juan noticed her expression, quickly turned away, unconsciously rubbing the scar at the corner of his eye, his wooden leg scraping softly behind him. Juan cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "More talk of the great sacred being? When did your sons start following this great sacred being?" "They just started, but they seem to believe it deeply. They come home and tell each other that the Soviet government has fallen. Big Brother Soviet Union has collapsed. In 9 more years, exactly in the year 2000, the Russians will fire nuclear bombs to get revenge on America, to get revenge on those imperialist capitalists. All the Russians will die, and the Chinese, fearing no one, will pour into Vietnam, kill all the men, kidnap the women, and gut the children, cutting out their tongues. The whole world will fight. The apocalypse will happen. If they don't prepare, the great sacred being won't caress and protect them, won't let them hide in the great ravine. Anyone outside will die, will be contaminated by nuclear radiation. Nuclear, sir. Not just not. Seed radiation. So nuclear aren't the same? Juan shook his head, trying to smile, but still letting out a heavy breath. He swallowed hard at Elder Exon's somewhat naive statements, which, however, all held a disturbing truth. Juan also knew there was information about a new religious group, rising in tone, her commune, called the Great Sacred Being. They believed that the Great Sacred Being, who emerged from a mountain cave and blessed this land to flourish and bear fruit, had incarnated into a man to bestow blessings and lead followers to the great ravine, a fairyland, a paradise on earth. Juan looked at Elder Exon tensely. He shook his head and exhaled heavily. All right, I'll deal with this slowly. In a few days, I'll go over and talk to your sons, see what the situation is. I can't wait. This afternoon, when it's cooler, I'm going to Vu's place to see what they're studying and practicing in there. Then, I'll drag my sons home. With that, the old woman tottered out through the creaking gate, made of acacia wood planks that had sagged to one side. Reaching the road, Elder Exon looked back with pity, seeing the secretary laboriously dragging his wooden leg, his lips pressed together as he closed the gate of the committee headquarters. Back inside the office, Juan sat down on the steps, lit his pipe, and sighed, watching the faint blue smoke dissipate into the air. The Great Sacred Being, Trin Van Vu, had only emerged a few years ago, but had very quickly attracted a large number of followers. Emerged was perhaps not entirely accurate, as Vu was a local resident, born and raised in this area. 7 years ago, Vu had been imprisoned for theft. Due to his sincere attitude and good rehabilitation, his 10-year sentence was reduced to just over half. After his release, Vu returned to the locality and married a woman named Duyen Simui, whose household was registered in Sante. At that time, Vu lived off his family's desolate piece of land. Perhaps borrowing from friends and relatives, Vu had a small capital, and, with the commune's permission, hired people to fence the land with B40 wire, dug fish ponds, and built pig pens. However, despite investing a considerable amount of money, within a few months, his pigs began falling ill, one after another. Foot and mouth disease swept through, and not a single pig in the entire town, our commune, died, except for Vu's entire herd. After the pigs, the fish followed. His 2 fish ponds turned belly up overnight, white and lifeless, unsellable and undesirable. Even Vu himself didn't dare eat them. From prison to freedom, then bankruptcy, debt piled on debt. So just a few days later, people saw Vu staggering at the edge of the forest, cursing heaven and earth like a madman. Barely a week later, Vu died. He died in his own fish pond. His wife, Mui, discovered the body when her husband didn't return home and, worried, went to the field to look for him. When she found him, Vu was lying face down by the pond, his face pale green, his lips ashen. Mui didn't call anyone. She just sobbed uncontrollably and carried her husband's body home for embalming. The bizarre events began to unfold from here. That day, Juan was also present to issue Vu's death certificate. Besides Juan, Elder Dai, a relative of the Trin family and an employee at the commune's medical station, was there to confirm the victim's condition. After examining him for a while, Checking his pulse and heart, Elder Dai sniffled and clicked his tongue, muttering sadly, "My dear boy, barely 3 years, and you've already departed." Wu's wife sobbed upon hearing this, then collapsed to the ground, causing several others to rush over, rubbing her forehead and pulling at her hair. One also sighed then, signing Wu's death certificate to prepare the family for the anointing and funeral. Wu had no immediate family. Both parents had passed away. Only Elder Dai could be considered his closest relative. So Elder Dai stepped in to oversee the funeral. Initially, everything was perfectly normal. Everyone did their part. The funeral, though simple, was deeply moving, especially when people saw tears streaming down Mui's darkened cheeks. Her hands trembled as she dipped a muslin cloth into a bowl of 5-spice water, slowly and gently wiping her husband's face. Wu's body remained stiff, cold, and utterly oblivious to what was happening before him. At the time of coining, Elder Dai nodded, signaling to a few young men. They immediately pulled Mui to her feet. Elder Dai farewell. Just as the cries began after those 2 words, the entire funeral hall suddenly fell silent. For from beneath the muslin cloth covering Wu's face, a stream of pitch-black blood, like tar, oozed out. The black blood soaked into the fabric, dripping steadily onto the floor. Relatives, neighbors, and even Elder Dai turned pale and quickly recoiled. Only Muai crawled frantically to her husband's side, lifting the muslin cloth and wiping the blood gushing from Wu's mouth with the hem of her shirt. It took a moment to regain his composure. Then Elder Dai, trembling, called out, "Mui, come here! Someone get me another cloth, quickly." Elder Dai then took a thick muslin cloth and covered the deceased's face after the blood had been wiped dry. The funeral remained deathly silent, eyes staring fearfully at the deceased as if witnessing an abnormal phenomenon. Whispers rippled through the funeral hall, soft as prayers for the dead soul. They believed Wu had died an unjust, untimely death, causing a spirit of resentment to arise in him. Di Yang became a strong ghost. Everyone believed this. Fearful eyes met, faces gray with tension. No one wanted to see someone who had been dead for an entire day suddenly gush blood from their mouth, just as they were about to be placed in the coffin. Beside the bier, Mui still wept bitterly, her sobs mixing with the rustling cicadas. People could also hear Mui's mournful, plaintive cries. "Please, my lord, I beg you, why did you take my husband like this?" The vagueness in her lament made a dozen heads recoil. The cramped 3-compartment house felt besieged by a spiritual net. Which lord? Who is she talking about? Mui must be crazy to say such things. But Mui wasn't crazy. Elder Dai swallowed hard. Mui, step aside so they can perform the coining ceremony. It's time. Muai sat on the ground, embracing the dead man's waist, her tear-filled eyes looking up. "No, no, you can't take my husband. My husband isn't dead. My husband isn't dead. Are you mad, woman?" Elder Dai snarled, his eyes wide. Several other young men also crowded in, trying to gently persuade Muai away. But Mui clung tightly to her husband's body. Her hands gripped and pulled, causing Wu's stiff body to suddenly tilt. Elder Dai glared and yelled, "Mui, are you insane?" But it was too late. Wu's body had rolled to one side, his stiff corpse tumbling with Mui's pull, falling face down onto the muddy floor. "Oh, my heavens, my love, my darling, wake up." Oh, dear heavens. The funeral hall was deathly silent. Some faint-hearted individuals scrambled out, leaving only a few resilient ones staring at each other in stunned silence, their eyes wide with horror at the dead body, lying face down on the floor. Black blood gushed from his mouth again, forming a puddle. Mui still hugged her husband tightly, screaming wildly, "The great sacred being took my husband. The great sacred being took my husband. My husband said so. Don't let him take my husband. Oh, I gave him everything, all my fish ponds, all my pigs." As she shrieked, Mui hugged her husband tightly and shook him. Elder Dai, after a moment of stunned shock, rushed over, pried the hands of his nephew's wife away, and slapped her hard across the face. Mui fell to one side, her mouth bleeding. But at that very moment, Wu's body also suddenly convulsed. That moment still haunts everyone who was present at Wu's funeral to this day. The body, tightly wrapped in its shroud, contorted like a cicada shell before thrashing violently. Black blood sprayed from his mouth, splattering across the dirt floor, creating a chaotic and terrifying scene in the funeral hall. People panicked and fled, screaming and yelling, overturning the coffin and the ancestral tablet that had been prepared for the deceased. Only a few who were too terrified to run remained, huddled in the corners of the house. The three-compartment house, usually imbued with the scent of incense and candles, now seemed engulfed in a feeling of horrific confusion. Mui seemed oblivious to her torn lip after her uncle's slap. She rushed to her husband's side, hugged his body tightly, and then tore away layer after layer of the shroud wrapped around Wu. Elder Dai was also cowering in a corner of the house. In his ear, he heard someone weeping and muttering, "Ghost possession, ghost possession." But perhaps it wasn't ghost possession, because after vomiting all the blood, Wu tremblingly leaned against the bed and stood up, his eyes wide, staring intensely at each trembling face around him. "The sacred being sent me back. The sacred being sent me back. The sacred being sent me back." He repeated it 3 times, then collapsed unconscious. That was the first and only time Secretary Huan personally tore up a death certificate. At the same time, he gladly wrote a statement from the witnesses, confirming that Wu's return from the dead was real. Elder Dai also did not seem overly concerned, explaining to everyone that Wu had probably only experienced clinical death, a relatively rare phenomenon for people in a remote area like Ton Ha Commune. The authorities intervened, the medic confirmed. But what people believed were only the 4 words Wu spoke when he first stepped back from the gates of death. "The sacred being sent me back." They began to connect Mui's panicked words, the phenomena occurring around Wu's family farm, and his unusual deaths. Wu hadn't died. The sacred being had brought Wu back. After returning from the gates of death, Wu seemed to be completely transformed. He didn't go out, didn't bathe, and for months he ate only white rice with sesame salt, locking himself in the storeroom behind the garden, refusing to interact with anyone, even relatives. The only person who brought Wu food every day was Muai. 3 months passed, and the theory that the sacred being had brought Wu back gradually dissipated among the people, replaced by the idea of mental illness, a form of psychological trauma. But suddenly, when everyone least expected it, Wu abruptly reappeared, bathed and clean, wearing white clothes all day, and began teaching strange doctrines through stories under the banyan tree about the great sacred being, the one who opened the land and water for the people of this region to live. Wu said that the sacred being had whispered to him, opened his divine eyes, allowed him to know the future and the past, and could even cure incurable diseases. Many believed, but many also doubted. Yet Wu's reputation began to rise from then on. With the doctrines that Wu claimed the sacred being had whispered and revealed to him, Wu gathered a number of true disciples. These were people who believed that the transition between 1999 and 2000 would also be humanity's final moments. Nuclear war would erupt between superpowers, and humanity would be annihilated. Only those guided by the sacred being, who believed in the holy doctrine, would be able to escape the bloodshed and endless suffering in the sea of misery. One had thought that in this desolate, wretched commune, people would never care about anything beyond food and clothing, beyond their daily livelihoods. Yet, it seemed that someone doing ideological work, but from a military background, like Secretary Huang, had forgotten that poverty is the origin of all calamities. Before Tring Van Wu emerged, strange things had already begun to occur in Tôn Ha commune. Buffalo and cows of some households stopped eating and fell ill. These strange diseases had no clear symptoms. The livestock simply refused to eat, were lethargic, and constantly lay in their pens as if afraid of the sun, causing great worry among many. More seriously, rumors began to spread in Tôn Ha commune about a ghost in the village while causing trouble. Within Tôn Ha commune, there was an ancient well. No one knew its exact origin. It was only known that the water source here was the livelihood of the entire village, because the well water was very clear and never ran dry. In both hot and cold seasons, the well water was always cool and fresh. The mouth of the well was about 20 meters wide. No one knew how deep it was. However, many people said they had tried to lower several stout bamboo poles, but none had ever touched the bottom. The villagers believed that the well's mouth connected to an underground spring, but a survey team that came here in the 70s said it was not exactly a pond or a swamp, but a small, completely dormant volcano crater. The ancient lava flows from the primeval era had become water veins. Water from underground gradually pushed up, filling this crater. That's enough said about the well. In truth, there was nothing to worry about this well. However, an incident occurred more than a decade ago when an unwed pregnant girl drowned herself in the village well. People whispered that ever since the girl drowned herself, the well became sacred. Many people fetching water at night or hawking goods early in the morning passed the well, heard mournful cries, or even saw vague figures washing their hair. They believed it was the ghost of the unwed pregnant girl from years ago. The rumors spread for a while, but when the authorities and local militia investigated, there was nothing. Until now, When livestock and poultry in the village fell ill, people inexplicably linked the story of the ancient well ghost to the incomprehensible diseases of the animals. The village's connection to the old stories was not entirely unreasonable, as recently many people had witnessed strange phenomena around the well's mouth. First among them was Mr. Han. Mr. Han was a demobilized soldier who had returned to the village to work on family planning. Basically, he went around encouraging people to limit themselves to 2 children for better upbringing. That evening, as usual, Mr. Han had just completed his weekly round through the commune, visiting each household to distribute condoms. As he passed the village well, Mr. Han was so tired he wanted to fetch some water to wash his face. Although this region was elevated, the weather was always humid. Even late at night, after just cycling around the village, he was drenched in sweat. Mr. Han rolled up his trousers, left his sandals on the bank, and waded into the well. But before he could even reach for the water, Mr. Han froze, struck speechless. For from the opposite bank, there was a splashing sound and a girl's giggling. Mr. Han looked up in surprise, then immediately froze in terror. Before him was a girl, unclothed, her entire body wrapped in a white cloth, clinging tightly to her skin. In the blue moonlight, this cool image was not inviting at all. Instead, it made Mr. Han shiver. He quickly composed himself, turned away, and shouted loudly, "Who's there? Whose daughter is that, naked like that? Put on your clothes right now! How indecent can you be?" But his reply was not an obedient "Yes, sir," but the guttural laughter of a voice half woman, half man. Mr. Han, come bathe with me. Come bathe with me. It's so cold down here, Mr. Han. Mr. Han. Han! At that moment, Mr. Han only saw from the neck down. The creature's face was covered by long flowing hair. Prominent porcelain white breasts, hidden behind the wet silk, were mesmerizing, as if he was spellbound, making Mr. Han freeze. He froze, then began to step forward, walking like someone hypnotized. Suddenly, he stumbled and fell forward, water splashing everywhere, his entire body plunging into the icy water of the village well. He thought he was doomed, but by some grace of heaven and Buddha, Mr. Han managed to surface, abandoning his sandals at the well's edge, then half stumbling, half pedaling his bicycle back home. While the story of Mr. Han being led by a ghost and almost drowning in the village was still stirring public opinion, barely a week later, another incident occurred. This time, the victim was a young man from the neighborhood. Hang and Ho Hang were both soldiers on leave after a period of duty. They returned to the village just when everyone was abuzz with stories of the naked female ghost in the well. Being young and soldiers, fearing neither heaven nor earth, Hung and Hoang decided to go and see what the ghost looked like. That evening, after their dinner, the two bought a bottle of wine and some mangoes, eating and drinking until around 10 p.m. when they staggered back to the village. Hung carried a stick, and Hoang had a rope, ready to fight and bind the ghost. The two sat waiting by a tree near the well's mouth to see if there was really a ghost. But they waited for a long time and saw nothing. It was late, the fog was thick, and there were many mosquitoes. The two couldn't stand it anymore and decided to go home. Before leaving, Hung told Hoang to wait a moment while he went to the well to relieve himself. Hoang obeyed and stood on the road, while Hung went right to the well's edge, pulled down his pants, and urinated. But as he heard the hissing sound, Hoang suddenly jumped when he heard Hung let out a shrill scream. "I'm dead!" Then there was a very dry thud right before Hoang's eyes. Hung simply sank into the water. "Nếu nói để you, ở sang năm đấy, ở tại đâu bọc à nè là why Hoang, terrified, rushed to shout for help. Villagers heard the shouts and grabbed lamps and torches, rushing out. That night, the young men of the village were mostly sleepless, taking turns jumping down to search for Hung's body. It wasn't until near dawn that they finally retrieved Hung. By then, Hung was stiff, and there was a large wound on the back of his neck, matching bloodstains on the steps leading down to the well. Most horrifying of all, there was a purple-black handprint clearly etched on the foolish young man's ankle. It was then that people whispered that Hung had been pulled by the female ghost in the well, causing him to slip and hit the back of his head on the stone steps leading down. The first death related to the ghost of the unwed pregnant girl stirred and shocked the entire commune. Previously, the area around the well was always a gathering place for many people, not just a common living space, but also a marketplace for the commune's residents. From the day Mr. Han encountered the ghost and Hung lost his life, people gradually moved away from here. They voluntarily relocated their meeting and trading spots to a distant plot of land. No one in the village dared to come to this well for water anymore. Everyone feared that the well was haunted, and that the ghost in the well would have to drag another person down to take her place before she could be reincarnated. This fear lasted until Trin Van Vu emerged. That was also the day he wore a long white robe, a headscarf, and with a solemn demeanor carried a small bag to the village well. That day was market day. Hundreds of households from the entire commune were gathered there. Vu walked on the ground, his clothes pristine white, his bearing ethereal and graceful, his face extremely solemn. He spread a brown cloth on the ground, placing before it a wooden clapper, a segment of banana stem, a small bowl containing a green egg, and a bunch of green bananas. Before the bewildered eyes of the villagers, Vu knelt on the brown cloth, his face toward the well's mouth, his eyes closed tightly as he chanted and struck the clapper. At that time, everyone in the village was surprised, not understanding what Vu intended to do. But only about half an hour later, people saw Vu begin to stand up, step down the stone steps, and then pull a white cloth from his bag. He stood on the bank, holding one end, and let the cloth fall slack, gradually sinking into the well. Water from below permeated the fabric, rising from bottom to top, and he slowly stepped back, pulling the cloth taut. When he reached the offering bowl, Vu stopped and laid the cloth on the ground. Before the villagers' eyes, black footprints suddenly appeared on the cloth. These footprints looked quite large, resembling a man's footprints, coming from the bottom of the well to the offering bowl on the bank. At that moment, many around Vu realized the purpose of this ceremony and quickly knelt down, clasping their hands and chanting Namo. Other curious onlookers stared blankly. No one could have imagined that they would witness a spirit summoning like this firsthand. As the black footprints neared the offering bowl, The incense sticks inserted into the banana stem suddenly burst into flames. A very large fire, but it quickly died out. Seeing the flickering light, everyone shivered and trembled. Those clasping their hands in prayer grew more numerous. Among the curious, someone seemed to recall the words he uttered when he first returned from the dead. The sacred being sent me back. The sacred being sent me back. The sacred being sent me back. Immediately after cleaning up the ritual items, he went to every household whose livestock was sick. For months, from the time he came back to life until now, he had not left his house, but for some unknown reason, Wu walked as if someone was guiding him. Knowing which families had sick animals, he would silently enter the buffalo, pig, or chicken pens without greeting or asking, then feed a handful of grass to one, a scoop of feed to another, or scatter some of the owner's own rice for the chicken. And with just that, buffalo, goats, cows, pigs, chickens, and ducks, animals that had starved for weeks on the verge of death, now rushed to eat, to devour, to peck. It seemed as if Wu's hands had been blessed with a magic that could revive the dead, turn evil into good, and pull even animals back from death's door. And another thing that greatly surprised the entire commune was that throughout the spirit summoning ceremony, and throughout the day visiting households, Wu said nothing. Or if he did, it was very little. He always bowed his head, clasped his hands, performing the rituals like a true ascetic, completely shedding his previous arrogant and uneducated demeanor. And each time he concluded and bade a family farewell, Wu would utter a single sentence: "The sacred being sent me back." Wu's fame rose from that day. And it had been more than 2 years since, but his followers grew increasingly numerous. Looking back at the profound changes in the area, Huan felt increasingly uneasy, and he was even more troubled when, just recently, a major newspaper from Hanoi representing a media organization came all the way to Ton Ha to do a report on Trinh Van Vu, the self-proclaimed leader of the great sacred being sect. Huan sat down at his desk. The creaking chair harmonized with the rattling of his wooden leg, as if to remind the current secretary of the instability of an area, and more broadly, an entire desolate remote region like Ton, Hakon, Hakomu, already rife with negativity. He opened the newspaper, and right on the first pages was a photograph of the great sacred being leader Trinh Van Vu. Trinh Van Vu had now completely shed the appearance of a tattered, poor man with patched and worn clothes. He was dignified, wearing a white Chinese-style silk tunic, white trousers, and rubber sandals. Wu had a long beard and sat beside a small table with a tea set and a sculpted statue of a man sitting cross-legged, also with a long beard but with his eyes closed. That was the statue of the great sacred being that the sculptor had created based on Wu's own image. Wu propped his elbow on the table, his finger supporting his broad forehead, his eyes confidently gazing straight into the camera, glowing brightly like those of a person in a fever. Below was a caption by the newspaper: "The self-proclaimed great sacred being Trinh Van Vu." And next to it was an interview, densely printed, filling the entire page. Huan didn't read the interview because he almost knew it by heart. The first sentence was a somewhat polite greeting from the reporter, followed by an introductory presentation, like a public introduction of constituents in a General Assembly meeting at various levels. Sir, please, tell us more about your religion. That was the reporter's next question, and in response, Trin Van Vu's demeanor was noted by the journalist in 2 parentheses, as if to draw the reader's attention. Polite, gentle, and peaceful. The 2 words, peaceful, made Juan shiver. The words peaceful always accompanied forces that wished to expand their influence with schemes disguised as this organization or that, aiming to put pressure on the government. Then came Vu's answer. One didn't know if the reporter had embellished anything, but indeed the reply was extremely polite. Yes, sir, reporter, truly. If what I am pursuing were called a religion, it would be an exaggeration, because we are merely people who follow a form of spiritual belief. The reporter's question meant that the great sacred being was not a religion. So what exactly is it? Is it related to other religions such as Catholicism or the mother goddess worship in our country, sir? Once again, there were notes to establish the solemn appearance of the interviewee. No, sir. This is a local belief, completely unrelated to the saints in Catholicism or the mother goddess of the forest, in our country's mother goddess worship. If you, Mr. Reporter, have researched our tone, you will surely know about the legend of the founding of this land. The ancient story tells that this place was once a desolate and isolated region, sparsely populated, where weak people struggled against the harshness of nature. One year, a person appeared from deep within the mountains, teaching the people how to cultivate rice and corn, how to clear irrigation channels, and together with everyone, they cleared mountains and built fields, creating livelihoods for countless people. From then on, the fields were vast, livestock flourished, and people enjoyed happy and prosperous lives. After establishing this peaceful and prosperous scene, that person returned to the mountains and never came back. The people, in admiration, honored that person as a sacred being, and because the sacred being emerged from the great ravine, they called him the great sacred being. Yes, Mr. Reporter, in terms of stature and scale, the great sacred being is perhaps equivalent to a village guardian spirit in the lowlands, but without his contributions, the people for 100 miles around would surely not have the happy and fulfilling life they have today. Therefore, we deeply revere him and resolutely believe in his guidance, hoping for his blessing and protection. Yes, Mr. Reporter, I have also looked into the legend you mentioned. It is indeed very fascinating. But if, according to your words, you yourself are not the great sacred being. No, sir, I am not. Although I revere him deeply, I am merely a mortal. It was by divine grace that the great sacred being opened my eyes and whispered to me, I would not dare to consider myself equal to him, let alone claim divine status. The title, Great Sacred Being, is merely given to me by the loving devotion of our followers in the holy doctrine. Sir, you can consider me his official spokesperson. Laughs. Yes. Then what specific activities will your holy doctrine undertake in the near future, sir? Yes, Mr. Reporter, in the near future, the majority of the holy doctrine will continue to practice according to the sacred will of our teachings, diligently laboring, building the holy doctrine to be ever stronger, and at the same time, actively engaging in economic activities. Firstly, to ensure the livelihood of our followers, and secondly, to achieve the stature and capacity to help others and save people. Yes, sir, as you know, Tonha is a very difficult area. So our holy doctrine wishes to help those in dire circumstances, young children and families, so they can escape poverty. Yes, one more question. Currently, your holy doctrine has not been licensed to operate by the state. What is your opinion on this situation? Yes, Mr. Reporter, regarding this, it is indeed true. However, it is precisely because of this that our holy doctrine is even more determined to build operational guidelines in line with the policies of the party and the state. 100% of our followers have stable jobs, actively organize charitable activities according to the principle of living a good life, upholding good faith, and respecting the law. On this basis, the followers in our holy doctrine hope that the party and the state will consider and create conditions for our activities. Yes, thank you for today's conversation. Farewell, and I wish you and the great sacred being sect continued growth and development. That was the full text of the interview that Juan almost knew by heart. Throughout the entire article, 90% consisted of advertisements for Trinvanvu. The reporter inexplicably made no mention of the problems and rumors created by this cult during its operation. The entire interview was practically just a promotion, painting a dignified and benevolent image for Vu, without any mention of Trinvanvu's dubious origin. Thinking of Trinvanvu, Juan grew increasingly restless. The sun beat down like fire. Looking out at the deserted courtyard of the committee office on a weekend afternoon, he sighed softly, then stood up, struggling to drag his wooden leg to the porch to smoke a pipe. In the corner of the yard, the bicycle with its drooping chain was still leaning there, as solitary as Juan for its temporary owner. The commune clerk, who was also an agricultural engineer, Bayo, had only been in this commune for a few months before quitting his job to become a follower of the great sacred being sect. Bao had graduated from Agricultural University 3, but couldn't find work in the city. Yet, somehow, through unknown connections, Bay was introduced to work here. This mountainous commune, apart from its terraced fields and scrawny corn patches, had no other basis for developing crops or livestock. So, after a short time, Bao had to switch to clerical work, while also surveying the terrain to find suitable locations for developing a crop adapted to the area. Clerical work seemed ill-suited for Bao. His large, tall physique, struggling and cramped in the rickety wooden chair behind the small desk, always gave Bao an air of difficulty and hardship. Bao talked a lot, sometimes even annoying people, but he was cheerful and articulate. On his first day here, Bao brought everyone many sweets and lowland tea, and from then on, Bao was always present at celebrations, banquets, and even funerals. As a clerk, Bao was rarely at the committee office. He usually claimed to be doing field surveys, but several times Juan himself caught Bao leisurely drinking alcohol at villagers' homes. Perhaps because of his fun-loving nature, Bao was lured by the followers of the great sacred being sect, and eventually became one of them. Juan was very sad because he was fond of this young clerk. Wow. Once, meeting Bao on the road, Juan was startled, seeing Bao as if he were a lost soul. He grabbed Bao's shoulder. Juan was amazed. Good heavens, what have you done to yourself? You look like a cicada shell. What kind of practice is this? Bao shook Juan's hand off, his eyes suddenly wide and bloodshot. Then he ambled away like a man possessed, leaving Juan stunned, staring after his emaciated figure and grey-green face, his dark eyes and mouth distinctly protruding, like someone born with buck teeth. Looking at Bao, Juan couldn't believe that there was a time when Bao had struggled behind that small desk, his shirt stretched tight by the bulging muscles in his arms. Now, Bao was merely a cicada shell, like a starving person personified in films from ancient times. Remembering Bao, a lump formed in Juan's throat, and the bitter pipe smoke choked him, making him cough violently. His wooden leg rattled and thumped on the floor because of it. It was late afternoon, so the sky was dark like stagnant snow, with a hint of red swirling in the thick, heavy clouds. The air was too humid. Juan wiped the sweat streaming down his forehead with his hand, then involuntarily looked out at the road because he had just glimpsed a silent figure passing by. Swallowing hard, Juan staggered to his feet. But by the time he reached the gate, the white-clad figure had vanished behind a bamboo grove. It was Muay, the wife of leader Trin Van Vu. Emerging from the bamboo grove, Mui looked back bewilderedly, feeling as if someone was behind her. But there was no one. It was too late. Mui had missed the last bus from the district because people at the market kept holding her back, asking about the holy doctrine. How could they join? Mui Yui just mumbled vague answers to get away, then advised people to go there in person. By the time she was ready to leave, the last bus had already departed the station. So Muai trudged along, waving for a ride, hoping for luck. Who would have thought that someone from the same commune would cycle past and recognize Mui? It was Mr. Tuok, a man whose son was a follower of the holy doctrine. Seeing Mui, her basket in hand, walking wearily, Mr. Tuok stopped his bicycle and called out loudly, "Hey, Holy Mother!" Mui jumped, quickly waving her hands. Her face wrinkled as she replied, "Oh, Mr. Tuok, please don't call me that. I'm neither saint nor divine." Mr. Tuok forced a smile, as if to cover his embarrassment. "Well, my son keeps calling you Holy Mother, so I just got used to it. But why are you walking like this?" "Yes, sir. I missed the bus. I was busy buying things at the market and forgot the time." Mr. Tuok told Muai to get on his bike. He'd give her a ride home, otherwise she'd be worn out. After a short distance, he looked back at Mui and clicked his tongue, saying, "So why didn't you tell your husband? Ask the leader for a ride. Why suffer walking like this?" Mui raised her hand and scratched behind her ear, trying to manage a tearful smile. "Where would the money for a car come from, sir? He's called the leader, but he never has more than 5,000 dong. His followers flock here, but he absolutely refuses donation. He's been supporting dozens of people all this time, for nothing." Mr. Tuok was astonished. "Really? Oh, heavens! Then where do you get the money to go to the market and cook for so many people?" "I have to beg from people, sir. It's so hard." The sacred being had compassion. "That's why he brought my husband back. But if this continues, My family will be on the streets soon enough. Mr. Tuok seemed sympathetic. Then he clicked his tongue and changed the subject. So, how is Truck, my son, doing these days? He's been in there for a month already. He went empty-handed. I don't know how he's living or eating. Mui replied. Truck is very diligent, sir. In the mornings, he studies the holy teachings, and in the afternoons, he labors with others to increase production. They are cultivating several more tea hills. It's lucky that the agricultural engineer joined, otherwise my family would truly starve. However, the tea cultivation doesn't yield immediate returns, so I'm very worried, sir. Mr. Tuok clicked his tongue again, out of habit. Then he muttered, Damn kid. I'll go home and tell my wife to send up a few £100 of rice. Oh, please, sir, don't do that. My family won't accept it. Heavens, if you don't accept it, where will your family get rice to feed all those people? Mui, I'm telling you honestly, you need food to uphold your faith. Our ancestors taught us that. The leader accepted teaching my son, and then accepted so many orphans and other followers. We are deeply moved. Outsiders think everyone inside is well fed, but who knew you had to go begging like this? Come on. I'll go home and tell my wife to send up a few £100 of rice. But, hey, Mui, this is our heartfelt offering. How could the leader bear to refuse it? Mr. Tuok spoke loudly, almost shouting, but he felt very relieved inside. Carrying Mui on the bicycle with patched, straw-filled tires, he didn't feel tired at all. Mui returned home and immediately got to work, preparing food with several other female followers, who lived together in a side house on the right-hand hill. The initial holy ground was in Wu's house, but later, as the number of followers grew, they gradually dispersed. Some felled trees, some cleared land, some built fences and stakes. Gradually, the 3 desolate hills around, which were previously only covered with sim and kopans, now became tea hills. 5 to 7 leaf houses sprang up, creating a peaceful and relaxed scene like a fairyland, especially on misty, foggy days. Mui stopped, placing her carrying poles at her feet. Immediately, someone emerged from the cluster of houses. Mui spoke. I just met old Mr. Ao. Tuok, he's giving us 100 kilos of rice, Trukertai. Truk lowered his head, looking down at the 2 carrying poles with over a dozen aluminum lunchboxes filled with rice, then nodded and said to Mui, Did my father say anything else? He didn't say anything, but his attitude seemed to have changed. Yes, ma'am. My father is very stubborn and conservative, but I know that with the leader's benevolent heart, he will soon be enlightened. Mui didn't reply, only smiled and nodded, then shouldered her poles again and went ahead, carrying the lunchboxes inside. The night was cold. The monsoon wind brought a chill and a fine drizzle that settled on the hills. Occasionally, the wind tossed the banana trees near the house, making their leaves rustle as if some vibrant spirit residing in this land had just emerged. Behind the thick, packed earth wall, nearly 2 handspans thick and sealed like a jar, the supposed fairyland had turned dark. Flickering on the 4 walls were dozens of black human shadows, reflected by 9 wavering, eerie yellow candles. The air here was a mixture of sweat, damp, earth, and the sour, sharp smell of human flesh, making anyone who entered from outside involuntarily wrinkle their nose. A rhythmic murmuring rose, as if from an unconscious trance. The steady sound of chanting, holy teachings filled with profound and mysterious codes. Occasionally, separating segments of the holy chants was the mournful sound of a bell, echoing from a distant primeval space. Great sacred being, holy heart, radiates in all directions. Great sacred being, holy heart, radiates in all directions. Great sacred being, holy heart, radiates in all directions. After exactly 3 times, a louder bell rang out than before. Immediately, the pitch-black shadows on the wall suddenly moved, turning their heads, their white eyes staring towards the door. In the dim darkness, skinny, blackened hands reached out tremblingly to receive the lunch boxes. The bronze bell, hanging on Truck's wrist, gently chimed. Under the eerie candlelight, Truck saw the lunch boxes being reverently held high by hands in the darkness. Nodding slightly, Truck took the bronze rod and lightly tapped the bell as a signal. Immediately, the hands slowly lowered. The lunch boxes were opened, and the faint smell of rice mixed with sesame salt wafted up, mingling with the thick, cloying odor of human sweat. Truck wiped his nose, then glanced at the time. He then stretched and pressed a button on the radio. The cassette tape slowly turned. A steady whirring sound began, followed by the recorded voice of the leader mumbling holy teachings. On the cassette, the recorded voice sometimes ran fast, sometimes slow, but always sounded like a divine, sacred voice echoing from hundreds of mountains and thousands of ravines, penetrating the minds and thoughts of the black shadows, who were greedily devouring the dry sand-like rice, mixed with sesame salt. In his first days here, Truck also experienced this feeling. The severe, almost harsh, mental and physical challenges had eliminated a number of casual followers right from the first days of listening to sermons for 23.5 hours over 7 days. Those who merely followed the holy doctrine out of curiosity often struggled and left before hearing half a day of the holy teaching. Those who remained after 3 days would be allowed to eat the holy doctrine's rice. How sweet, how precious was that white rice with sesame, salt, after 3 days of no food, only water. Truck could never forget the feeling of saliva welling up in his mouth at a handful of rice, no bigger than a guava. Dozens of people like Truck then ravenously devoured the rice, like drowning men clutching at a log, receiving life bestowed by the manifest holy being. Then, having received his blessing, new followers would undergo even more arduous trials to nurture their faith in the holy doctrine. The black shadows in this house were new followers, enduring trials to cleanse their past sins, as if, in part, the holy doctrine was removing their evil shackles and dark intentions, so that they might be reborn once more into the protective embrace and guidance of the great sacred being, reaching the holy land of eternal life, forever escaping the chaotic, squalid, and filthy temporary realm. Regardless of age or gender, once they passed the first test, they would come here, shed all their clothes, completely abandoning their defenses, to let their naked bodies return to their most primal form, as if not yet born. When the embryo was still in the mother's womb, the new followers would be entirely painted black with ink by former followers like Truck. This layer of black ink in a dimly lit, dark room was the safest space to protect the embryo, to protect the new followers who were about to receive divine grace, the right to live once more. 15 days of self-imprisonment in darkness were 15 days when the new followers listened to the leader's sermons, listened to him recite the holy teachings, listening and reflecting deeply within their souls to recall their past mistakes, to be ready to cast off all resentments, attachments, hatreds, sufferings, and joys, to prepare the purest possible soul for the great sacred being. Truk could never forget the white rice eaten in that dark, gloomy space during those 15 days. The rice was salty and bitter, but it was unbearable not to eat. Hunger gnawed like a deadly disease, spreading from his belly throughout his limbs, even burrowing into every muscle fiber. But always echoing in Truk's mind were the leader's teachings. Don't let hunger devour our bodies. Don't let our physical selves be tormented by sensations. And so, the holy teachings were like a mesmerizing medicine that made Truk no longer feel the gnawing pangs of hunger. Instead, they were replaced by a blissful sensation, as if sinking into a dream. For 15 days, living in darkness, dozens of people, smeared with ink, mingled and touched each other's flesh. But all of them thought of only one thing: purification. They only craved purification, to be cleansed of filthy black, to be cleansed of the sticky feeling of sweat and tears, to be cleansed of sins before finding the great sacred being. 15 days passed. Those, like Truk, trembling, holding hands, stepped out into the light. The sunlight shone directly into their eyes, dulled by the darkness, making its brilliance appear even more powerful. In the stream of sunlight there was a figure appearing like a savior, a conquering angel, gently reaching out and stroking Truk's sweaty head. At that moment, Truk suddenly burst into tears like a child. His choked sobs were followed by dozens of other hushed cries. Rebirth had arrived. People took Truk's hand and led him to the lake in the valley. Truk knew this lake. It had once been a fish pond that the leader had owned before being granted divine grace. Now Truk realized that the great sacred being had caused the filthy animals in the leader's house to suddenly die. Their death was also a purification for this place. Truk stepped 1 foot into the lake. The lake water was freezing cold. Although the sun above was still blazing, wherever the water reached, the ink on Truk's body dissolved. His skin, moments ago oily black, was now white and bright, as clean as if all earthly dust had been washed away. Truk cried even harder. The happiest tears of his life were perhaps 1,000 times more joyful than the first tears he shed when he was born. In just a moment, the ink was gone, and his eyes had gradually adjusted to the sunlight above, making the figure of the sacred person suddenly seem familiar, gentle, and beloved. Truk walked onto a small bridge made of bamboo slats lashed together. The leader stood on the bridge, smiling and nodding to Truk. Beside him was a bamboo tray, on which lay a bowl, a bottle of wine, and a knife. Truk was momentarily flustered, unsure what to do, when suddenly the leader picked up the knife and cut a line across the palm of his hand. Truk shivered. The leader's blood, deep red, dripped into the mouth of the glass wine bottle, then spread out into vivid red clouds within the clear alcohol. When the wine in the bottle had completely turned red, the leader stopped. He placed the knife back on the tray, then took a handkerchief from his pocket, gently wiped the wound in his palm, and put the handkerchief away. Truk was again amazed, almost speechless. The wound in the leader's palm was gone. That calloused hand poured the wine into the bowl, held it out to Truk, and gently said, "Drink." Truk unconsciously trembled, raised both hands to receive it, closed his eyes, and drank it all. The wine was spicy and strong. The blood had a metallic, nauseating taste, but Truk immediately felt lightheaded, his head burning, sweat pouring out along with tears. From today, you will be a child of the great sacred being. Divine grace will protect you, guide you, caress you, bring you from darkness to light so you may know right from wrong, lead you so you may know who is foe and who is friend. Drinking this cup of wine blends holy blood and your blood, so that a part of you also belongs to the sacred realm. This cup of wine is a cup of divine grace, a celebratory cup. From now on, you will choose to live a prosperous and happy life under the protection of the Holy Spirit. Truk knelt down for the leader's hand to be placed on his head. And so, the others also came forward to receive the divine grace of the great sacred being. Remembering those days, Truk still felt thrilled. Perhaps that was why, among hundreds of followers, only a few like Truk were deeply trusted by the leader and entrusted with important responsibilities as one of the 3 sacred officials overseeing the 3 realms for him. The 3 realms here were heaven, earth, and humanity. Truk was the one who managed the human realm among the 3. The other 2, Bao and a man named Long, were respectively responsible for the earth realm and the heaven realm. Truk collected the stack of lunch boxes and took them outside before closing the 2 heavy wooden doors. Inside, the new followers were still dazed, listening to the leader's chants emanating from the cassette player. Truk carried the stack of lunch boxes toward the hill where the female followers lived, then returned to the main hill where the leader rested, and also where he preached on major holy days. Upon arrival, he saw the 2 other sacred officials sitting in the hall on 3 grand chairs behind a screen. Truk nodded a greeting to Bao and Long. Both replied silently, as was the inherent habit of the followers here. While waiting for the leader to appear, Truk occasionally glanced at Long's limping leg. A few years ago, in a prison camp, Long had suffered a serious accident while quarrying stone. Since the accident, Long had been paralyzed from the waist down and could not move. This meant Long's life would forever be tied to a wheelchair, an inseparable companion. Because of the severe injury, Long lay in prison like a corpse awaiting burial, cared for daily by his fellow inmates. However, due to the critical injury that caused an incurable illness, Long's sentence was reduced, and he was released from prison twice as early as scheduled. From the day he was released, Long and his family traveled everywhere seeking a cure, from acupuncture to acupressure, from traditional Eastern medicine to applying herbal poultices, until his back was raw. Drinking traditional Chinese medicine until his stomach almost perforated, but the paralysis remained complete. The day Long's family had completely lost hope was also the day Long was brought by his family to meet the leader of the great sacred being sect. The leader looked at Long with a kind smile, then touched his knee and told Long to stay because he would cure him. 1 week, 2 weeks, 3, then 4. The leader only came daily to talk. Massage Long's knees, give him water, and feed him rice. Long confided in someone that he had suddenly become much more cheerful. Then, one morning, Long saw the leader rush in, holding a pair of scissors. Before Long could react, the leader forcefully stabbed the point of the scissors into Long's leg. Horrible pain shot straight to his head. Long frantically pushed back with his hands, then hopped into the yard because the wound on his leg was still bleeding. Rebellious by nature, and having been in and out of prison, Long screamed and cursed. Only when he saw the leader smiling brightly, holding the scissors and spreading his arms, looking up at the sky, did Long suddenly remember that he was standing in the yard. From that day on, Long did not return home. His illness was cured, but Long also became a follower of the holy doctrine. Truck still sees the red, abnormally protruding scar on Long's leg to this day. Suddenly, there was a clattering sound from the door of the back room. All 3 sacred officials sat up straight, maintaining a solemn demeanor. The leader walked in, his eyes brilliant, his pupils sparkling, reflecting the light from the red lamps hanging high. Darkness was blocked at the door of the house, for here the leader himself was the light. Ilaw, jayang ing, jayaro, dalaw.